Niels Frederik Severin Grundtvig, Part 4. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this, our last video presentation, mini lecture if you like, on Grundtvig's works and his ideas about society. It has been, to me at least, an interesting 3 lectures, and now very soon 4. And I can't tell you whether there will be more or not. I think there is a good chance we'll make some more on this subject, but it will be intertwined with other things. We've entitled this, our 4th session, The Educational Paradox, as you will notice on the screen. The educational paradox, what do I mean by that? Well, firstly, I think it's necessary that we make some sort of status around the fact that we refer to Grundtvig in almost everything we do in the educational policy. We refer to Grundtvig, and we refer to his good friend Christen Kold, who started some of the earliest public high schools, Folke high schools, based on Grundtvig's ideas. Whenever we refer to our private school system and our primary school system. The thing is it true? That's the big question here. Do we do things the Grundtvig way? That's a little more tricky in my book. We can go to, as you see, slides. That's a very interesting subject. I said slides, I mean grades, of course. Grades. Grades are an interesting subject to look at here, because we administer grades in every single minute of our educational life. We receive grades, and when we get old enough and stay in the system, we apply grades. We evaluate all the time. We measure. The big question here is that good? And is it what Grundtvig wanted? That, to me, is the big question here. Should we ask Grundtvig his opinion on grades? If you recall what I mentioned, I believe it was in lecture number 2, he said, I hate grades. I don't like grades. I don't want grades. No more grades. Grades are good for one thing only, the bashing of students. But we still administer grades to a high extent. Actually, we accelerate the use of grades. And we use those in the name of Grundtvig. If you look on any website, on any Danish private school, there will be somewhere, unless you're very lucky, a mention of Grundtvig and Christen Kold. So, systematically, we say we're doing this the Grundtvig way, and systematically we don't, at least not there. That's one thing. How about the debate culture? Grundtvig very clearly advocated learning via debate and conversation. The living word, as he called it, rather than the dead book. Now, what did he mean by that exactly? I'm sorry. What did he mean by that exactly? We know that because we've been there before. He meant the oral, the verbal transformation of data rather than the written transformation of data. So, he meant that if we sit down and talk to each other, if we make sure that in this group we have one who knows more than the others, or 2 who knows more than the others will be wiser when they leave the conversation. That's interesting. Do we do this in modern schooling? I think not. We do not have a debate culture at all. At least if you go to the United Kingdom, we have a debate culture. I don't know whether there are much other things in the UK school system that are good. I don't know very much about it, but I do know that they do have a debate culture. You learn how to defend your viewpoints, and you learn how to exchange viewpoints with others. Now, that was what he had in mind. He wanted us all to learn via conversation rather than the book. Now, what did he use? What did he want to use the books for? Well, to him, books were data storage. Books, that's where you put your data. That's where you make sure that everything is saved for the next time. So books to him was his computer, without the computing bit. It was just a storage facility, and nothing more. And what he spoke up against was the tendency of using books as a deity. Books were elevated, put on a pedestal, and made the actual goal of teaching. Here are the books, you go and worship. And that's what he had something against. And I do understand it. What he was saying was, you need to interpret these books, you need to look in them, you need to read the bloody things, and you need to say out loud what's in them for the next person to understand them, so he can read the same book and perhaps reach a different conclusion. Rather than go home, read your 5,000 books, come back and make sure somebody knows that you've read them. Which brings me to the next subject. He was also heavily against the examination culture, and for the very same reason. What do you need exams for? Other than for somebody to measure somebody else. If you have an exam, you can be absolutely certain that you will divide people into groups based on their daily precision, their ability to perform at that given moment, at a given in a given context, talking about a given subject. What if that person is sick and goes to his exam anyway? What if he is stuttering? What if he is nervous? I say he, it could be a she. What will happen then? I can tell you, they would get bad grades, and then brings us back to the grades. So, grades are a very bad measurement for contextual situation. I know I mention, I call this slide the conclusion, and it is. But I'm not going to finish off in 15 seconds and that's it, so don't worry. So, the conclusion here is, we quite clearly know that the current education system does not work. We also know that the best learning follows the learner. That is he or she who delivers knowledge, learns the most. We know that. We know that controlled group work works. We know that grades only show a fractional state of a narrow specific moment in time. So here is my big question. Why on earth do we not change it? That's a different question, but we can clearly say, very, very precisely, that it seems as if we have a system, it doesn't work, let's apply some more of that. That will probably make it work. Strange. We also know that we have a tendency to quantify things. Now, when did that happen? I've been there before, but I'll just go through it again. That happened as a fallacy. It happened as the wrong conclusion to the end of a system. In the mid-80s, we had the introduction of Margaret Thatcher introducing Thatcherism, Ronald Reagan introducing Reaganism. What do I mean by introducing? I meant quantification of public management. You run a country or you run any local authority and you start measuring things to figure out whether you're doing it the right way or the wrong way. Now, what can you measure when it comes down to building a road or when it comes down to your education service? You can only measure one thing, that's money. You can't measure the quality of a road. There will be small diversifications, but you can make sure, you can be absolutely certain that if you give them the same basic ingredients, the road will look the same. So the only way you can make a cheaper road is by saving on the material or paying people less. Aha! And this is where another factor comes in. If you quantify and if you commodify, you make sure that there is competition on the market. So you orient your public service towards a market situation. You make sure that you can go down and shop public welfare, if that's what you want. You can shop anything in that big warehouse called What Does Society Need? And that could turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes we've ever made. Because how do you measure that? And what kind of competition do you want? In the 1980s, we privatized the bus services in Denmark. We did that because the general right-wing movement in Europe, beginning in the early 80s, and for the very same reason, by the way, resulted in the fact that we had, all of a sudden, more companies competing to do the same jobs. Here is the theory behind it. Hi there, we're an authority. We want somebody here to drive buses from A to B, please. And we want to pay so much for it. Come and make us a bid. So, instead of driving from A to B, we insisted to make it a competition, enabling us to, at least in our view, to get the best possible bus service from A to B. The only problem is that those who said, yeah, I'd like that, gave a low price. And what happened when they got the job? They start cutting the service. Because how else would it be possible? They couldn't make it any cheaper than the public authorities. Bus driver costs the same, the bus costs the same, so where should this saving come in? Of course, on the service, perhaps on the salary, but mainly on the service. That's exactly what has happened. They've cut down on routes, they've cut down on availability. So places in Denmark will stop having bus traffic after 4 o'clock, forcing you to buy a car. Interesting. So, the direct result of this quantification was we started measuring things. How do I make sure that my investment in public healthcare or public education is I get my money's worth? I do that by looking. I watch. Hey, George, you're teaching kids. Are you sure you're doing it well enough? And that is direct consequence. That's the direct consequence of quantification and commodification of services, that you need to check them to see if they're all right for anybody to buy them. Instead of just saying, hi, we're a country, we have a school, we want people to be better at reading, come join us. We don't see that as a job of society. We see that as a market, based on market terms, instead of based on a social term. And that is something that really can pollute our ways of seeing things if we're not careful. We see it very clearly in our schooling system right now. We press our students quite a lot. And we do that based on one simple assumption. If we press them hard enough, the strongest and the fittest will survive. Ooh. So we've got a little bit of social Darwinism put in here. It's very elegant and it's very, very dangerous. If we press them too hard, what do we get? We get sick people. The direct consequence of pressing people, be that students or anybody else for that matter, you become stressed. What does that mean? That means that you develop a pathological condition based on, I can't take anymore. Your body reacts, your system reacts to the constant pressure. Of course it does. It does. It's a biological, physiological phenomena based on flight or fight. If I threaten you, you either turn around and hit me, or you run away fast. That is exactly what we do here. We provoke an adrenaline rush in people, and at some point, the body can't take anymore. It reacts to the exposure of adrenaline, cortisol, and all the other biochemical processes that we set in motion by pressing people. The direct consequence of which is, currently in Denmark, more than 30,000 people on permanent sick leave with stress as the main factor. And another, pay attention here, another 500,000 waiting to go there. That is alarming, to say the least. That's 10% of the population, all included. It'll cost a bundle, and it already does. The Danish healthcare sick leave payment alone for that area of stress contributes or costs roughly 1.85 billion euros per annum. That's about $2 billion per annum. That's a lot of money that could have been spent elsewhere. What if we put these $2 billion into making conditions better for these students? What if we've used it to make sure that they do not go sick? What would have happened then? That's the interesting bit here. Which brings me to, We know that the best learning follows the learner. We know that the absolute best way of learning things is via conversation. How do children learn? I guarantee you they don't use books until they can read them. So this is pure Vygotsky and Brunerian theory. This is scaffolding at its best. We need to help people to advance. To do so, we take a group of people, and in this group we place some who knows more than the others, with the direct consequence of the transfer of knowledge. It's inevitable, and it works. We know that controlled group work works. In Denmark, there are only 2 universities that officially adapt group work as a formal part of their curriculum. Aalborg and Roskilde. The others are getting there, slowly but safely, because they can see that it quite clearly works. But we still have an enormous amount of lectures, a lot of lectures, because it's cheaper, at least officially. You put one guy there and 50 people here, and you start talking, a little like this actually. It doesn't cost a lot. If you do group work, and you have to relate to all these groups, you need more people. And that makes it inefficient, seen from an economical point of view. However, if you want good students, and if you want them to succeed, it's much, much better. So it doesn't pay to go the cheap way. We also know quite clearly that grades are a curse. We know that grades have done nothing good for anybody, anytime. If you meet anyone here, perhaps it's exaggerated, if you meet 80% of the students here, 90% of the students, if you ask them, what's your main focus? I will guarantee you that very, very few will say, to be a better psychologist, to be a better historian. I want to be a bloody good historian. Oh, no. Their main focus is, quite naturally, I want to make an A. I want to score an A. A. I want to go out there, get myself a job, and make billions and millions. And for that reason, I need to score an A. I've heard that somewhere. The last bit they will leave out. But they will want to score an A. That's their main focus in life. So what do? They decode their surroundings. They try to figure out, how do I score an A? They adapt to the situation. They decode all the symbols, all the semiotics around them. Whatever they can find, they identify as tools for getting an A. It doesn't need to be a spoken word. They just have to observe. And the A and the ways to get it will be apparent. We have a group. I've been parts of some group during my study here at Aalborg University that have been granted A's automatically. That's quite interesting. That is because at the other end of the table, there are educators who identify who they think will be good scholars. And when they do the right things, that makes them good educators. You see? So it's interconnected. If teacher A has student B, and student B does well, that reflects on teacher A. So it's a self-reproductory system of, I help you to be good. You help me right back by scoring an A. So this system reproduces concentration on the grade itself. The grade itself becomes the goal, not the subject. Whether you study history, math, psychology, sociology, or how to wash your clothes in 50 manners, doesn't matter. It's the grade that does all the talking here. So you're being transferred into a systemic creature rather than an independent creature with a free will. I think will is out. Okay. So what do we do? First thing is we need to conclude that we are nowhere near Grundtvigian. We're nowhere near Grundtvig's original thoughts on education and schooling. The second thing we need to do is to draw a line somewhere, say, we need to do this differently. We need to act on it if we want happy students that don't go down with stress. We need good students who are more clever than when they came. And we need to identify what makes a good student and stick to it. To do so, we need education to be, partly political project, but they need to be left alone. We need to leave it to those who know everything about schooling to take care of education. That makes as much sense as not having a butcher taking care of defense politics, or your plumber doing accounts. You see, you learn specific trades, and when you've learned them, you do them well. So if you ask an economist to run social welfare, he will look at numbers. That's what happens when you do that. So we have to have the courage to look away from that, look beyond it, to go elsewhere with our society. And with this rather moral, perhaps, and quite political statement, I end these lectures on Grundtvig. I look forward to hearing you again, or seeing you again. Thank you very much for watching. And this has, as always, been a presentation of White Closet with Paul Grønkjær from Mobile Video behind the camera. Thank you very much.